You digesting physically, mentally, dentally? Excellent, I am as well. We're now going to have a slightly more relaxed afternoon, which I feel is nice before we then dial up the adrenaline again after 4. So now we're in the hives section of the day. We're really lucky that we get to have our hive sessions here in this beautiful space. Obviously, our colleagues are in sessions all over the building, so you'll be potentially crisscrossing them throughout the afternoon. Now, one thing that I must say is that due to some time constraints and getting everything packed in, we're not going to be having Q&A in this hive afternoon. I apologize for that because I know I mentioned it this morning, but there will be other opportunities throughout to raise questions, so don't worry. If you've got something urgent, we will find ways to get your feedback in. What I'd like to do now is get us started. We're going to go straight in. We're going to welcome the brilliant Tom Dixon and Suhair Khan to deep dive into their Aqua Culture project. So please join me in welcoming them to the stage. Enjoy.
Joining us today. Very excited to see so many of you in the room. We're going to be talking about Aqua Culture, which is an incredible project that Tom began about 10 years ago, working at the intersection of design and marine biology and architecture. It's a project that's evolved since its inception in the Bahamas. It's moved to the Maldives and possibly going to new locations around the world. And it really involves the consideration of how coral regeneration and design can be interwoven to create new features for a moment of time in which there's coral degradation all over the world. So we're going to go into that in more detail.
We need to find a clicker, because otherwise we can't go into any more detail.
We need a clicker, please. Yeah. Thank you. Anyway, meanwhile, most of you know who Tom is, but I'll give you a brief intro. He's one of Britain's most influential designers. He's worked across furniture, lighting, interiors. He's also involved himself in new territories and materialities throughout his career. So him working in coral and with coral as a material is not necessarily something shocking or different, but it is part of the evolution of his work, which we're going to go into over the course of this conversation. And so Tom, while the clicker comes, I think it's worth telling everyone. Thank you.
Can we get a clicker? No, we need a clicker.
Okay.
She still hasn't understood.
Anyway, so if someone can change the slides behind us, why don't you just tell us about the project? I don't think we need images.
Okay. Okay, so maybe 10 years ago, I discovered on the internet, as you do, a project by a visionary architect called Wolf Hilberts, who had decided that he was going to grow cities underwater using a brand new technique called biorock. And as a result, here we go. I can show you a picture. Thank you very much. So here we go. Here's Wolf Hilberts. So in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, he decided that he was going to make these extraordinary architectures and that he was going to float these cities to the surface. So he discovered a way of creating a natural cement. It's kind of backed up by quite a lot of white papers and a series of different researches in the field, which prove that you can attract minerals from the seawater onto a metal framework using a very small voltage of electricity. So the process works like you get a solar panel and you charge your metal framework, which can be made out of concrete reinforcement bars. And over a year or two, it starts sucking the calcium from the water, a bit like the fur on your kettle, and creating a deposit which is effectively limestone, which is also calcium carbonate, right? So here's my first experiment. Here we are in the Bahamas. And you can see on the right the framework's made out of maybe 10mm rod. After a year, which is the picture on the left, you see this accumulation of calcium. And then in the middle, after 3 years, quite a dense deposit of natural cement, effectively. So obviously, it's a really stupid way to make chairs. But in the process, you can see it grows a bit like tree rings. So maybe 4 years later, this 10-centimeter rod becomes 20 centimeters of rock that you've created through this electrolytical process. So, you know, the more interesting thing beyond that, although it's quite interesting given the amount of carbon that cement uses, 6 or 7% of the global emissions are concrete, is that it also encourages coral to grow back at much faster rates, right? So coral being itself a similar composition of calcium carbonate, effectively limestone is just compressed over millions of years, shells and corals. They did discover that over 4 years you could grow maybe 4 or 5 times faster than it might left to its own resources. It seems like the electrical power saves the coral energy because it's doing exactly the same thing. It's sucking the minerals from the seawater to grow.
Right, and coral is a living organism. It's living, it's breathing. Can you talk a little bit about how coral is actually planted or seeded onto these structures?
So it can be many ways, but in this experiment, which is in the Maldives, they're seeking out the heat-resistant corals and cutting them into small pieces, and then growing them in small tanks, and then replanting them in the water. So I'm trying to find it. Yeah. So what's going on is that effectively a coral is a whole series of organisms clustered together, and they're making their skeletons out of the same process as we're talking about on the metal frameworks.
And it's a very manual process, right? You have to they seed them in the nursery, then they swim out, they place them on these structures, they grow, and then they also hatch.
Yeah, and then you can start collecting the larvae of the heat-resistant corals. So there's something interesting going on. The scale is medium to small, and really when you go out there, you see the scale of the problem, right? So, you know, I was thinking about this and really trying to think about where there was a reason to grow concrete, and that for me is sea defenses. You've seen extreme weather events arrive more and more, beaches get washed away, and effectively the human response to this is just to dump a huge amount of concrete into the seabed to try and defend. All that does is to reflect the power of the waves rather than slow it down, which is what a coral reef does, right? So if there is money to be made, it's not in sustainability, it's in trying to work out how to use the money that's currently being poured into concrete, into sea defenses, to then regenerate the sea floor. So that's the kind of piece I'm on now. So next step is this. So in the Maldives here, trying to make bigger structures to test out the theory, and those structures, and to see how they affect wave power. Going in on an island where they've got a biology department as a foundation there in a luxury hotel, starting it off as almost like a hotel attraction, if you like, because they need corals to attract tourists, and then scaling it up to be more sea defense. So those are the tanks where the little tiny fragments are propagated, and then these are the bits that you banned me from showing, which are to do with AI. But the general idea would be to try and scale it up using a whole variety of techniques, but you know, that's where you come in, I think.
Right. So one of the reasons you got involved in this project is because of coral degradation. So for those of you who don't know, I think we're in the 4th major coral bleaching event of the last century, but this one is actually extended to the point where the bleaching is not reversing. So coral bleaching means when corals heat up to the point where they actually die. So you will see in many warm water spaces around the world, you go on holiday and you'll see what is called bleached coral, which is basically it's white, it's glowing, and it's dead. Coral reefs are actually home to some of the world's greatest biodiversity, and coral that's now being reimplanted is actually a very limited number of species because not just of rising temperatures of water around the world, as well as, you know, kind of dredging due to tankers and construction. There's also acidification in oceans, which means that it's very difficult for most types of coral to grow back. So what Tom has been doing is to think about nature as your client, but also as your material, to see if there's a way of maybe harnessing it to have bigger impact? And is that something for you that you think about as a designer? I'm sure, is there anyone here who's a marine biologist? No, probably not. So, I mean, I think, but I'm sure many of you are working across disciplines and you've done that your whole career. How has it been for you to work outside of your own discipline with scientists, marine biologists, and to think about nature as sort of a collaborator?
Well, I always think of design not really as a discipline in itself. It's really a connector of lots of different strands. In fact, design is quite a new word altogether, right? It's only about 100 years old. It used to be called decorative arts, but it also incorporates engineering, just a general interest in manufacturing and I guess increasingly the planet itself. But for this to work, the only way it's going to work is to find a way of scaling it. I mean, despite in that last picture of the biologist fragmenting the corals, they've got 100,000 corals under cultivation, but that's a literal drop in the ocean when you see the scale of the ocean and the scale of the degradation, right?
Right. Okay, so in terms of like where you go next, like who's doing this at scale? Who's doing it in a way where you think that there could be real impact? So I actually went to the Maldives to see the project, because we can talk about technology a bit later, but it's also really depressing. And I know that, you know, so many of these conversations today are about the planet, but when you actually think about what isn't possible, you see these marine biologists physically going out, like there's a full moon and the eggs hatch and they're going to collect the sort of the larva and to plant it in the nursery. It's such a long and beautiful and manual process along the timeline of our planet, and we've totally disrupted the ecosystem, and it's very hard to imagine that these sorts of initiatives could make a difference at scale, however beautiful they might be.
Right, so my insight was really look at where the money goes in coastal defense. I mean, a kilometer of concrete wall built, or those tetrapods that you see dropped into the ocean, not only destroys the marine environment on the floor, but also costs somewhere approaching $10 to $20 million a kilometer, right? So that's where the money is. So if you can propose something which not only grows its own coral, is self-repairing, but also regenerative for the environment, that's where the money's going to come from. I mean, from a scale perspective, I think I need to turn the question to you, really, because you've worked in effectively the biggest company in the world at the time, which is Google, working on robotics and on self-driving cars. And for me, the only way this can scale up is really through the marrying of that scientific knowledge with a much faster way of identifying where there's problems, measuring the seafloor, and all of the other things that you can measure, and putting them into bigger models. So you introduced me to the idea of digital twins, for instance.
Right. So I'm sure there'll be other talks on AI and climate in the conference, but one of the things that AI is really helpful for in terms of ecological sort of research and work is it helps to organize messy data. So data that's collected of natural ecosystems is often what they call messy in computer science or data science. It's difficult to align. It's collected using different methodologies across different time frames, and obviously is impacted by many different exogenous factors. AI can actually be really useful in helping to create pathways through that data and to provide ways of predicting everything from biodiversity of a particular part of the ocean, to thinking about coral health, to looking at how you could actually map and measure into the future in a predictive way what various interventions into a coral reef might do in the future. What is happening so far, for the most part, is that when you're looking at scattered ecosystems around the world, there's a lot of interesting applications of technology that are happening, but there's very little coordination across them because the scale of the problem is obviously so vast. And again, coral is living and breathing. It needs communities. It needs, actual individuals on the ground assisting and protecting and preserving, and governments actually thinking about policies to protect further degradation. But there are initiatives that are now happening. There's a major one in the Red Sea. There's others in Southeast Asia. There's obviously stuff happening around the Bahamas where things like robotics are being brought to play. So rather than humans coming in and trying to replant the corals, you actually have robots that are physically coming and attaching corals to biorock or other sort of forms of infrastructure that will help corals to grow more quickly. But if you think of a robot handling a very delicate piece of natural organism, it is exactly how you imagine it to be. I'm sure it'll become more sophisticated over time, but there's coral breakages. It's not always done in the right way. And also, from my perspective, when you think about nature, you already mentioned breaking the coral. Just to have a robot kind of sticking it to a wall isn't really maybe the way we want to be thinking about how we care and tend for our natural ecosystems. Having said that, there is work that's being done at scale using robotics and using AI, both to think about how we imagine the future, building digital twins of the Earth's oceans. NVIDIA and IBM are both doing huge projects in that space, as well as actually looking at how we can create healthier coral ecosystems in warm water ports around the world, which governments are having to invest in. Again, it has to be done at scale. And so from your perspective, I think there could be an opportunity to maybe partner with any one of those initiatives to see what might be possible.
Right.
And then the other thing that I wanted to bring up, so Tom, this is about AI, but Tom is actually, how many people know that Tom is a musician?
Was.
Okay, still is. Anyway, Tom was the guitarist in a band called the Funkatronics, and has been on Top of the Pops, and was very well known in his time, but he decided to become a designer after a series of accidents and whatever else. But the reason I bring this up is because sound and music are also really relevant to the health of corals. And I'm really curious, I know you've already been looking into this, as music and sound and corals. Google DeepMind launched a project last year called Surf Perch, which was actually an initiative with the arts and culture team at Google, where I used to work, which is looking at how they can measure coral health by actually recording the sounds of the corals. So there's two things. One is the sound of a coral ecosystem lets you hear about how sort of strong the biodiversity is, which means that the corals are strong. And it sounds like a series of clicks and clacks. If you listen to it online, it's quite beautiful. But also playing the sound of healthy coral back to reefs can actually help them to regenerate and become stronger. So that was to my earlier point about robotics, where you can actually think about using technologies in ways that are a bit more empathetic than just trying to fix things, but trying to think about how you can almost take what the ocean is naturally creating and feed it back to those infrastructures. And I wonder if that's something that you've thought about in your own work.
Okay, that's a huge question that you've already kind of answered yourself, right? But I mean, obviously the music thing is kind of, people often ask me if there's a direct influence with my work, which there sort of isn't. I mean, what was interesting to me about music was being able to kind of make your own creativity into a business. I think the music thing was also interesting from the perspective of a kind of non-verbal communication, which people that don't play music don't really understand how you can be in a room with people that you don't speak the same language and harmonize and get in step with them. And I think, definitely that project that you're talking about, which is about the sound of the ocean, or the sound of a healthy reef, is about attracting other species back to the reef to make it a regenerative environment. And so fish are attracted to the sound of a healthy reef, right? So that's an interesting and possibly scale-upable project. But I think, for me, the interesting thing which about the music is this idea of being able to be in step and communicating without it necessarily being verbal. And I think, if you go deeper into that, and I know you're interested in quantum, the fact that we're all vibrating, either in tune or not in tune, will become more and more important. I mean, have you got any words to say on the quantum revolution that's upon us now?
Is anybody working in quantum computing here? No. So I know there's a number of material designers here and material scientists, and so where I'm really interested in the possibilities of quantum technology in this space is around how you can actually quantum. The way a quantum computer works is probabilistic, so you're looking at sort of the best possible outcomes, as opposed to a regular computer, which is deterministic. So it'll give you the same answer no matter how many iterations of the same thing you put into it. It'll give you the right answer. Quantum computing actually operates according to the laws of quantum physics, which means that you can have many different outcomes all at the same time. One of the reasons that is interesting for design is that it actually makes it easier to replicate or to mirror, to map to natural materials. So you mentioned vibration. Actually, the sort of tension and frequency and weight and density of a natural material can be much more easily replicated and mapped with the use of quantum computing than we can actually do right now. So there's a possible world in which synthetic coral, for example, could be created as a living and breathing organism. There are actually initiatives ongoing right now around the world where fake coral is being put into the world's oceans. So unlike what Tom is doing, where he's putting in these structures with real coral that grows, there's actually pretend coral that's sort of put into kind of trick marine life to live amongst it. But we could be hopefully looking at a future in which, again, at scale, because of how quickly these computers work, how hopefully quickly we can be thinking about 3D printing, we could be actually replicating the materiality and maybe the sort of living organisms present within things like coral reefs in a way that isn't really possible right now. But that is still speculative because these technologies are still some way away, and by the time we get to that point, we might have lost a lot more of our natural ecosystems.
Yeah, and what was clear from the trip to the Maldives was really very much how urgent this project is. And of course my research has already taken almost 10 years, and it will take another 3 or 4 really to get the metrics around the structures that I've just put in the Maldives, and we don't have that time. Every quarter degree of temperature rise kills another raft of species. They're very delicate, and what's been very clear to me from speaking to the scientists is that they're all actually quite national. They have their own special ecosystems in quite small areas, and each of them behaves in a very different way. So the amount of knowledge you need to have and the amount of data that you need to have really goes beyond what a human researcher can do. And what interests me about both the quantum, but particularly AI at the moment, is it allows you to collate all of that data and put it in a legible and easy to read model, which can not only be used for the science but can also be used to market, produce pretty images for marketing departments or governments to understand what can happen in the near future. But back to this scale idea, how will quantum, we all know about AI, we've been banging on about it for really, for at least 2 years, right? What scalability will quantum bring to the AI doesn't at the moment?
Okay, so I don't know. I think predicting the future is bad, but I do think that what we have to always come back to is we still need governments, policymakers, and we're also limited by the constraints of our environment. So I think one of the mistakes we make with technology is exactly this, is we think about the possibilities for scale, prediction, collation, but actually at the end of the day, the problem is a physical problem. We're adding to that problem by building data centers in an unlimited fashion, by creating carbon emissions in the ways that we're doing by building these technologies. And we actually don't have a governance or regulatory roadmap in place in the real world that could help us to measure where we might actually be creating more problems down the line. But on that note, I actually wanted to ask you a question about your industry, because I'm sure there's lots of people sitting here who are thinking that you already have a successful business, you've had a very successful career, and now you get to sort of sit around and think about how to help the planet, swim around on the beach in the Maldives. And so I wanted to know about design as an industry and how much, the idea of sustainability, natural materials, this sort of work can be front and center in your work, or how much it still will have to be a side project where you actually make money, or people here in this room are thinking about how they can have impact on the planet, should be thinking about strategically how to do this kind of work if they should want to do it.
Yeah, obviously the sustainability question, is inevitably the first question that people ask, at this kind of conference. And, in my industry, which is furniture and lighting, it's effectively making anything would be hypocritical to claim sustainability. I think the regenerative part of it becomes kind of interesting. But because we've got a global business and we ship stuff all over the world, any gains that you might make in materiality or how you make the thing, or reduction in power use in the manufacturing process or noble materials is lost in the shipping around the world, right? So, I'm interested now in the manufacturing systems which are deconstructed so that we can make things all over the world without necessarily having to ship them. But beyond that, I think, whatever happens, what interests me about these kind of projects is being able to look at it from a very naive and untutored, unscientific perspective, and trying to make links which other people clearly haven't made yet. So, if we were looking for the correct amount of money to turbocharge this, it wouldn't be sustainability money, it would be cement money, right? So cement producers themselves, presumably have got to find a way of getting closer to net zero, or being, encouraged to by governments. There may be a giant cement company that'd be interested. Definitely governments that are having to spend a lot of money protecting their coasts from erosion as it collapses into the sea. That's an urgent problem. Would quite like to find that they could protect their beach or their coast with a structure which costs £300,000 instead of 11 million. So what I've learned through being not just a designer but being an entrepreneur is that you have to think differently about where the money's going to come from, and you've got to be really, really quick and elastic to spot an opportunity that other people have not, right? So I see my practice actually, evolving to look more at these kind of systems if possible. But in the meantime, I'll still be making a bit of furniture. Yes.
Yeah, well, I think it's really powerful to the role of design, because you said that it's not really definable, but one of the reasons I've always been really interested in design and designers is the idea that you can have a vision and explore new avenues, and, of course, you have the ability to do that in the furniture that you create and the lights, but also you're able to think about functional ways of having outputs. One of the difficult parts of it is that you have to learn to speak new languages. So, for example, you're working with scientists and marine biologists and coral reef experts and game developers, and you talked about companies that are looking at protecting coastlines from eroding already using concrete, and that is also something that you probably built as a skill over the course of your career, I'm guessing.
Well, it's not so much a skill. I think to be even remotely effective, in your job or mine, is you have to be curious, right? And what's phenomenal about AI and the internet just in general is the speed at which you can gather more information and make more connections between what would be seemingly disparate threads of information. So the digital world has been incredible at not only introducing me to this project, but many, and allowing us to fast track a lot of the thoughts, discard them, and reiterate. Right? Previously you used to have to go to the library or send off for stuff. So I think the acceleration the digital world gives designers, may match the urgency of the problems that are out there. If we're lucky, and if we're not, all of that creativity will be spent on war and drones and fighting, rather than saving this very precious kind of globe that we inhabit, right?
Yeah, I just got back this morning from Pakistan, where they've just had these massive floods caused by climate change and glaciers melting, but one of the greatest reasons for damage was deforestation. And I was thinking a lot about the corals as sort of holding the ocean together and protecting coastlines, these tiny and very precious organisms that actually have this incredible force, and we just don't even know that they're there.
Yeah, there's an invisibility about them unless you've been lucky enough to travel to the Indian Ocean. But for sure, when you see the drones that are being, the huge clouds of drones that are either being used for killing people or for entertaining people in Shanghai, you just think those could be repurposed quite quickly to reforesting the difficult to get to hills of Pakistan or everywhere else, right? So there is hope, right?
Yeah, if we stop fighting with each other. Anyway, we're happy to answer questions afterwards if you want to chat with Tom about his work or this project. But thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Tom, for sharing your story.
Thanks, Suhair. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
How was that? I was having such fun talking backstage now with the people that you're going to hear from now that I was slightly shocked to have to come to speak to you, but I mustn't hog them. You are about to be in for such a treat. I can't wait for you. We're going to bring out Panasonic to the stage. Please join me in welcoming Takahiro Ikeda and Rowan Williams. They are going to come here to talk about the power of design for business transformation. You are in for a session.